Hello, everyone. My name is Paulino Brenner, and this is the Educators, Performers, Creators Show number 13. And we are here today with a very talented world language educator. Before I introduce her, and she'll talk about herself and what is motivating her these days, I want to say feel free to connect with us and interact with us. If you have any questions for this wonderful world language teacher, please join me. You can tweet by sending a tweet using the hashtag EPC show. If you're watching this on YouTube, just leave a comment on YouTube and we'll do our best to answer it live. If you're watching the recording, go ahead and submit your question anyway. I will make sure that she gets it and you'll get an answer. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Sara-Elizabeth Cottrell. Hello!
Hi, Paulina.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for being here and taking time of your busy life with everything you do to be here to talk about world language and motivation.
Yeah.
But before we get to the motivation that you are working on right now, I would like to take you back to another motivation. What motivated you to be or to become a world language teacher? How did that happen?
I grew up in rural Georgia and was homeschooled starting in the 5th grade. And so we had, because of a particular business that operated in the town that I grew up in, it was a very small town, but this business brought in an influx of workers from Latin America. And so my dad decided that since he had learned Spanish when he was in college, this was 20 years later, that he was just going to pick it up again. And he was a genius and could do that sort of thing. So he got a textbook and a shortwave radio, and he picked up Spanish again. And so then he thought, well, Sara-Elizabeth needs to speak it too. So he started teaching me and a handful of friends every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 5 o'clock at our dining room table. And for 2.5 years, I fought my parents, telling them, I will never use this. I don't know why you're making me do this. This is too hard. And I got involved with different opportunities. One of them, this would never probably happen now, but this happened back in the early 90s in rural Georgia. There was no ESL anything in the public school system. And the local elementary school found themselves with a couple of 5th graders, one from Mexico, one from Puerto Rico, who spoke almost no English. And I was very involved in 4-H, so through 4-H, they asked me to come in periodically and tutor them, which I could do without affecting my school schedule because I was homeschooled. And so I went, and I loved working with them on their English and their homework, and it helped my Spanish skills. And then when I was 15, my dad took me to Ecuador, where I further fell in love with the language and the culture, and it started to click, and I thought, wait, I can do this. And I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and after those experiences, I decided I wanted to be an ESL teacher. And then a series of circumstances after college took me to teach Spanish for a few years before I went back for my graduate degree in TESOL. And I fell in love with teaching Spanish to American high school kids, which was not anywhere on my radar of what I wanted to do. And that's been my world ever since.
Well, that's great, but I'm sure as we all go through those first stages of, teaching in a classroom, especially after we come out of college with so many ideas and thoughts and theories and methodologies, it's not that easy. What were some of your challenges when you first started teaching at schools?
Well, some of the challenges that some teachers have that I did not have were that I was single. And I was living in a new place, so I had no family, no kids, and no friends to speak of. And so I had a lot of time. And the next time I went to teach after I went and got my graduate degree and got married and went to school and started teaching in a more communicative way too, where I wasn't like stuck on the textbook lesson plans, the biggest challenges for me came then and not really in my first few years of teaching, and that was, where do you find the time? My family needs my time, my friends need my time. I need to have a life, but this is just really time consuming. So that was the biggest challenge then. When I first started, probably my biggest challenge was that I was so close in age to my students. I had one student, my oldest student was only 3 years younger than I was. And so I could have parents walk in the room and not be able to tell me from the students. And so that was a challenge to create that distance, because when you're going to give someone demerits, they can't view you as like, my almost college buddy kind of a thing. So that was one challenge too.
I see. So great. So you have a really good start there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you are in contact now with a lot of teachers, and especially new teachers. We have seen each other at different conferences where we can see some seasoned teachers, but also some new teachers. So you didn't have a rocky beginning except for the age difference, but you know that some of the teachers might. Do you have any suggestions for some of those new teachers finding their ways on their first few steps?
Yes, so the two biggest things would be you need a network. You need people to come around you to offer you advice and to even offer you resources, because the first place you should be able to go is your professional learning network, right? If before you spent hours looking for that perfect, infographic on the foods people eat in Mexico, why not ask the question and see if someone else has already done that work for you? So then you need someone to vent with and bounce ideas off of. So you need another person or several people around you that you can go to and ask for help, ask for resources, ask for advice. When I was first teaching, I could not have named another Spanish teacher outside of my school pretty much anywhere. So I was pretty much flying on my own. And that would be the number one thing, is you need a network. And the second thing is to take baby steps and be content with it. The number one problem I hear from new teachers, and especially new teachers who are committed to the most effective ways of teaching in the classroom, is that they're burning out. And I hear it all the time. They start out on fire and they're so excited, and then a couple years later they're like, how do I do this? I am burning out. And the problem is that they're trying to change, whether they learned it wrong, they think they learned it wrong in school and they're trying to change everything, or they've been doing it for a couple years and now they want to change everything. The problem is they're trying to change everything. So my second biggest tip would be to take baby steps and be content with it, because your students will benefit more from a teacher who is taking baby steps and sane than a teacher who is trying to change everything at once and burns out and moves into, law school or something and leaves the profession, which happens all the time, because we try to change too much too fast and we just can't handle it because we're human.
Right. And one of those professional development opportunities, I know you are involved in many of them. It's actually coming up here to Minneapolis, Central States Conference, March 13 and 14, that you are part of. So I'm excited to see you in person again.
Yeah, I get to see you again.
We'll talk about your presentation in a few minutes, but before we get, so that's a great networking opportunity. Maybe later you can mention other networking or professional development opportunities you are involved with. But I want to get to our main topic today, is motivation, and you have been thinking and working a lot around this topic. So how did you start with this? How were you motivated to talk about or research about motivation?
I am always up for a book recommendation, and one of my good friends, Thomas Sauer, recommended to me the book Drive by Daniel Pink. And so I decided I would read it, and about the same time, and maybe a little before I read the book, I started thinking about homework. And I noticed that what teachers notice all the time is that students are just not motivated to do homework. So people ask me, okay, so it's fine that you assign this for homework, or it's particularly in the flipped classroom, it's a big deal. You can tell students to do this, but what if they just don't do it? What if they don't have the supplies? What if they don't have the time? What if they just don't want to? And so I decided that I was going to totally revamp the way I looked at homework. And this still continues to be one of the top accessed tags and posts on my blog, Musicuentos. to give students a choice of what they wanted to do with homework. And so instead of assigning any particular homework, like a worksheet or bookwork or whatever, I told them, here's a list of options you can do. You can do a song on lyricstraining.com, or you can comment on someone's blog post in Spanish. You can listen to Latin pop music on Pandora for an hour. You can change your Facebook language to Spanish and play on Facebook for an hour. And they particularly love options like that. Why don't you post-it note items around your house that you don't know the word for, like doorknob. I can never remember the word for doorknob. So why don't you put a post-it note on it, and after a week, come back and tell me what the word is. So they got to pick what they wanted to do. And I saw so much more engagement with the idea of homework with my students than I ever had before. And around that same time, I started reading the book Drive. And it turned the idea of motivation on its head for me. That Alfie Kohn has a similar idea, specifically related to education, in the book Punished by Rewards. That you can, all this research that people have done where you ask people to do something and you can give them a bonus, because that's the way the business world works, right? You can get a bonus based on how well you do in a project or whether or not you do this extra project. And they're carrying that over into the education world, where they want to base pay on our students' test scores. Well, it turned out that as long as it was just a mundane mechanical task, then that worked. But if the task was creative at all, then that hinders the person's motivation. And the whole book Drive is the surprising truth about what motivates us, is the subtitle. And Daniel Pink surprises us with research after research after research that shows that there are really 3 factors in what motivate people. There is autonomy. So you get to do what you want kind of when you want. If you have ownership of it, and we're talking about that all the time, right? We want students to own language. So you have ownership of your learning. And then another one was purpose. When there's a reason for what you're doing. You know what you're doing and you know why you're doing it. And then the third motivation was mastery. You get a chance to actually succeed. So this concept of success is motivating, owning my own learning is motivating, knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing is motivating. That made me take a look at what we're doing in the traditional world language classroom, and there's very little of any of that. We don't really care what students want to do. We do, but when it comes out in practicality and what the curriculum says to do, a lot of times it's what the curriculum wants them to do with their language and what we want them to do with their language. And so that started me out on motivation and how it affects different parts of our teaching process.
Right. And so tell us, how does it affect what we choose to teach, the vocabulary, or even the assessments that you do? You talked a little bit about homework. How does it affect these different parts? Do you have any examples?
So on the beginning of the question there, when you're first planning, one of the things that we first plan is what units to teach, or the textbook tells us what chapters we're supposed to teach. And so my question is this going to offer my students, is it going to access their intrinsic motivation? Because whether or not they succeed in my classroom right now is important, but the real question is, in 10 years from now, are they going to be doing anything with it? And I hear a difficult trend in world language teaching that if we were just teaching it the right way, then that, oh, I took 4 years of Spanish and I can only say hola and taco, would disappear. And I've said that. I've said, you know, the reason that kids say that is because they didn't have a teacher that was doing it the right way. So if you would just do it the right way, then all your students would be successful in the long term. And that's just, I found out, that's just not true. And the difference is they don't want to. So the question is really, will they want to? And so my question now is, looking at what units to teach, do they want to? what do kids want to talk about? They want to talk about themselves. They want to talk about their entertainment, movies. They want to talk about things that bug them. They want to talk about things that they love to do, their hobbies and activities, and some of those are very common units. And then there are other things that we talk about, like hammering weather. You know, do kids really want to do a weather report for 3 weeks? It's just a question to throw out there. Maybe they do, but we should be asking ourselves those questions as we look at the units to plan. And then right after we do that, we look at the vocabulary. Well, for one thing, when you look at the vocabulary list in a standard textbook, it's just really long, and that's demotivating in itself. It's just too much content. It's very difficult for students to navigate that number of words and phrases within the amount of time that you have.
That's right.
So how can I narrow that down? Well, one thing is to let the kids narrow it down. What words do they need to talk about what they want to talk about? And we can talk all we want about how, but they need this word and they need that word, and I think they're going to do that. But the thing is that it's that I want to have control. And I want my students to talk about skating, and my student wants to talk about hunting. I had a Spanish 2 student. You know, the word for hunting an animal was not anywhere in our vocabulary. But on his assessments, he routinely wanted to talk about his hunting because he was in hunting season. He was out every weekend. And so that student could have come up with the word for to hunt an animal off the top of his head anytime, any place, because he wanted to. And so that's an issue with vocabulary. I know some teachers who are advocating getting rid of the vocabulary list altogether and letting students just navigate the way that they need and they want to. The list itself doesn't matter to me at all. What matters in vocabulary to me is how we assess it. But the point of both perspectives is that students will acquire the vocabulary that they need. If they need it, then and they want to talk about it, then they're going to have the vocabulary. If not, if it's just to memorize for a quiz on Friday, I can guarantee you 6 months from now they will not be able to recall that word because it won't be in their long-term memory.
Right. Sarah, could you give me a little bit of a background on right now on your teaching situation? How much freedom do you have into choosing or altering the curriculum and the themes? Because I suspect that not all teachers might be in the same position.
Right. Actually, I have complete and total freedom right now because this is my first year not in a classroom.
Awesome.
But I taught for 10 years, so I will go backwards a little bit for you and answer that. And I was given a whole lot of freedom to teach however I wanted with whatever curriculum I wanted. And so I taught with a textbook for the first 3 years exclusively. I wouldn't have known what to do outside my textbook. In the 4th year, after a series of workshops that changed the way I was looking at my classroom and got me involved in storytelling, I decided to ignore it some, and then by the 5th and 6th year, it never left the shelf. And so, but the results in my classroom spoke for themselves. We were retaining more students into higher levels. The students were acquiring real proficiency in Spanish. And so I didn't need to defend anything other than that. But I do deal with a lot of teachers who say, well, I have to teach this and I have to teach that. And one of the typical arguments, or not arguments, but situations is a common assessment. So one thing I tell teachers is to explore with your administrator how much freedom you actually have, because I find that many teachers have more of a sense of what they can't do than is actual reality. And then once they explore that with their department head or their curriculum specialist for the district, it ends up that they have more freedom than they thought they did. But a lot of places have a grammar-driven common assessment, and they really can't get around it. And I recently did a consultation with one teacher in New Zealand, actually, that they have a list of, I think it was 1,200 vocabulary words.
Wow.
Yes.
For 1 year?
I think it was 2 years.
2 years, okay.
That all the students after 2 years are tested on, all of them regardless. And so my advice to her was, because she had freedom with the curriculum but not with the vocabulary assessment, which is the most typical situation that I see, to go ahead and plan her units and plug in her common vocabulary that she wanted to do there, and without even looking at that common assessment. And then go look at the common assessment and mark off all the words that she had already just naturally built in. And it would seem a lot less daunting because she'd think, oh, we're already doing all of those words. Then to take the words that that she hadn't included and to offer them to the students perhaps in the final 2 months before the exam, so that the students who wanted to ace it had the opportunity to study on their own. And because some students care about that grade and some students don't. So why should I put myself in a place where doing something that I don't believe in, which is teaching too much vocabulary, in order so that some students who want the grade can get the grade and other students who don't care about the grade can blow it off anyway. So that's one way that I address that issue.
Right. Great. So talking about the different ways that it affects the topics or resources that we choose, how do you look at this motivation and asking the students, and how does it change what you give them as a resource?
Sure. There's a big push, and understandably and wonderfully so, recently to use authentic resources in the classroom. And it started off, of course, in more intermediate levels, but now there are a growing number of teachers who believe that you can use authentic resources to teach in the novice classroom and do it well, and that it increases student learning because they're getting authentic language. And I am so in that camp, but I also do not believe that all authentic resources are created equal. And in fact, I'm doing at least one, maybe two conference presentations this fall called Goldilocks and the Three Authentic Resources. Too boring. Yeah. Too hard, too boring, and just right. So when you look at an authentic resource for your classroom, I've seen this over and over where a teacher will think, oh, I found it. It talks about X topic that I wanted. And so they plug it into their lesson plan, and it falls completely flat. And the two most common reasons that it falls completely flat are, one, it was just too hard for the student. And there's also a saying that goes around that says, you don't change the text, you change the task. And I get the feeling there, but I think you can change the text if you want to. If you need to change something about the authentic resource, as far as eliminating some parts of it that are just distracting, or focusing students' attention on a particular part of it, then that's an important way that you can change it to make it so that it's not too hard, because too hard is very demotivating. Success is motivating, right? Mastery. And failure is demotivating. When you look at something and you think, oh, I can't do that, you don't want to anymore. You don't want to try. And the other thing is just too boring. So as an example, I was looking at this lesson recently to talk about microfinance. And you can't really talk about microfinance without talking about Muhammad Yunus and kind of the father of microfinance. And so we find this video, a TED Talk, where you can go and listen to a history of microfinance from the father of microfinance. But, I mean, check out how long that video is. It is 24 minutes long. And it's 24 minutes of him standing there in front of a brown wall. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to watch it. I don't. And so as an alternative, check out this other video from onehead.org that was put out by Kiva. And you can see, first of all, that video is only 2 minutes and 7 seconds long. And it is a completely visual representation with the audio behind it explaining it of what microfinance is and what its purpose is. So if you were a student in 9th or 10th grade, which one would you want to watch to learn about microfinance? And so this is an example of putting yourself in the head of the student. What is it that you would want to do if you were them? And there's something to be said for encouraging perseverance, but the attitude that is, well, they're going to have to learn how to do hard things in life, so they just need to suck it up and do it, regardless of what I tell them to do. It's not very empathetic, I find. Then just as an example again of a motivating resource, instead of choosing a long article for a novice student, it's much more motivating to choose an infographic, because they get to see and interpret, and just the fact that there's numbers, there's a map there. This is an example of a community in Guatemala that is benefiting from microfinance, and so we find this, and I specifically want students to look down at the bottom left corner, because I want them to tell me what are the problems in the country that microfinance might be able to help. And those are all target vocabulary, or they are cognates, and they're numbers. And so it's authentic, but it's immediately comprehensible, and just when they look at it, it's not demotivating the way a wall of text would be demotivating. So that would be an important thing that I would say. The most important question when choosing resources, two important questions. Number one, if I were in 9th or 10th grade, would I want to do it? And number two, is it just too hard?
Mm-hmm. Right. Great. So rounding up your idea of motivation, are there any, you really been working, well, I think you obviously recommend Daniel Pink book, I suppose. But besides that, you've been working a lot about this area and making your changes. Are there any suggestions that you might have to teachers to start looking and making some changes, or trying to start making some changes in their classroom? I know that when we talk about letting students choose their own vocabulary and their own topics, some teachers hesitate. They think they might lose control. Or if we're thinking of some creating components in the classroom, some teachers might say, but I'm not creative, I don't know what to do, I prefer to stick to the textbook, it will guide me. Are there some suggestions for the first steps into looking into this?
Right. The first thing that I would do, for sure, would be to poll my students. And maybe even before that, you have to talk to yourself and tell yourself the truth. And the truth is, I feel like I don't want to lose control, but the fact is, I never had it to begin with. We mistakenly believe that teaching language and learning language is something like memorizing history facts or the formulas to use on a math test, and it really isn't. It's a guessing game, and that's why second language acquisition researchers call the brain the black box, because all we can do is say what goes in and say what comes out, and the rest of it is a guessing game as to what happened in the middle of the process there. And what we do know is that you cannot control the vocabulary that your students will acquire. You can only provide an environment that encourages long-term memory of the things that they actually want to and need to learn. So I would poll your students. Just, baby steps, right? You don't want to burn out.
Yeah.
Think, you know what, next Monday I'm going to poll my students. I'm going to ask them, what do you want to learn Spanish for? What is your favorite thing to talk about with your friends at lunch? What job do you want to do in the future? So I know teachers who end up with a class that is predominantly headed for healthcare jobs. And I was in that situation one year where I had a very small AP class. I think it was maybe 10 students, and 6 of them wanted to be in healthcare. And so the majority, I let them craft the majority of their assessments around what it was they wanted to do and their goals. And then I had a couple more. Sometimes I'll have a high percentage of students headed into, they think they're headed into law enforcement. And so that might guide some direction for me. But it really, I think the biggest thing is to just convince yourself that I want to have control, but the end result and how much Spanish or English or French or whatever it is I'm teaching they will speak 10 years from now is really dependent on whether or not they want to. And it really isn't dependent on what grade is going to go in. Web on Friday or whatever program you use.
Right. So I want to point out one of your blog posts on your website Musicuentos called "The M That Trumps Your Method, Materials, and Madness." And I hope that by now some people can guess what that M could be. Is it Musicuentos?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I should have thought of that.
Maybe Musicuentos is the M that trumps your method. Well, no. So, of course, this is article, one of your many posts about motivation, where you express some of your thoughts and ask some questions as well so that teachers can reflect. I will include the link to this blog post on the description of this video so that people can connect with you and connect with your ideas. But while we're here, I would like you to tell me more about Musicuentos, inspiring passion and proficiency in world language teaching. How this blog post came about, what are your ideas behind it, your goals, some activities you do around it?
Sure. Musicuentos started as a blog for me to kind of vent my excitement. I was sitting on the couch with my husband talking about how excited I was to see all this research actually playing out in my classroom in such exciting ways. And he looked at me and said, "You should start a blog." And that was in fall in 2008. And I consider that one of those phrases that changes your life. I, at the time, and have continued to be very convinced that music and stories are the most motivating and comprehensible ways to deliver target language input in the classroom. And so I named my blog Musicuentos to blend the Spanish words for music and stories. And it evolved into an opportunity for me to help teachers in different ways. One thing that I do is develop resources that helps teachers use authentic resources in the classroom. So there's lots of leveled readers out there in Spanish for novices to read and materials to accompany them to help novice students. But there isn't a lot out there that is intended to help intermediate students read authentic novels. So I developed reading guides to the novel La Ciudad de las Bestias by Isabel Allende and Cajas de Cartón, the memoir by Francisco Jimenez, and those are available on the blog as well as a couple other resources, some free and some paid. And I also do conference presentations and school visits and curriculum consulting. So I periodically will meet with on Google Hangout with a teacher who just needs a little bit of extra help to talk to me for half an hour or an hour. Or I visit a school. So like last weekend I was in the DC area observing teachers at a school and helping them figure out how they could get their program on a more communicative track and be more effective in their school. And that's kind of what I do.
Awesome. So I'll make sure to also put a link to your blog and your contact information on the description of this video so that people can connect with you. And another way to connect with you is also to see you present at different conferences. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned before, you're coming to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Bring a coat.
Yeah.
Bring a big coat.
I almost got snowed in DC last weekend. I really am hoping that's not the case in Minneapolis in a couple of weeks.
Let's hope. Let's hope. But I would like to hear a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be talking about here in the Twin Cities. I believe your presentation is called Arming Students for a World of Incomprehensible Input. And that is going to happen on Saturday, March 14th at 8 a.m. Here at Minneapolis, Minnesota for the Central States Conference. So what are you going to be talking to us about?
There's a couple problems with vocabulary, and one of them is that students just cannot physically, possibly, unless they have wild aptitude and memory skills, remember a lot of vocabulary at one time, and they just can't handle it. It takes time. But you can give students very early tools that will help them elicit words that they do not know from a sympathetic listener. And then another problem is that the vocabulary changes from place to place very frequently. So you're from Argentina. What word do you use for jacket?
Chaqueta, abrigo, campera.
Capera, okay. So that's one that would not be known. Like, to me, that is, Little Red Riding Hood type thing. But in Mexico, the word for jacket is chamarra, and you probably, no one in Argentina would use that, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So this is a problem for intermediate students, that you've been told that the word for sandal is sandalia, and then you find out that someone says chancla, and you don't know what chancla is, or chancleta, or huarache, which is yeah. And so, what's your word for sandal in Argentina?
We can say ojotas.
Oh, that's right. I just found that out. 25 years of Spanish, and I would not have been able to come up with that word for it.
But if you say chancletas or las chanclas, people will understand.
People will understand what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the tool of circumlocution helps students navigate the world outside your classroom. We can put comprehensible input all we want in our classroom, but once they get out of our classroom, the world is full of incomprehensible input. It's just beyond their ability. I still, with my Mexican neighbor, she will say something, or I'll want to talk about something that I don't have the word for. And so what do? Well, I explain it. And so there's a series of words and phrases that you can teach students to use. It's a thing that, it's a person who, it's the opposite of, it's it means the same as, words like that, phrases like that will quickly arm even early novice students with the tools that they need to explain what a word is when they don't have the word, and so they can make themselves understood and actually elicit the vocabulary from someone, which creates memory for them. Plus, we're going to play taboo, and that'll be fun.
Awesome. Oh, that sounds like fun.
Because that's the point of taboo, right? Is that you're trying to explain what the thing is without actually saying the word.
Perfect. So that's what we can expect. Great. So I want to say thank you now, wrapping up. Thank you very much for taking time out of your Saturday to be with us and sharing your expertise and your ideas. I'm sure that many people will benefit from this. If anyone is watching this as a recording, please don't hesitate to leave a comment on the YouTube video. I'll make sure that Sara-Elizabeth gets to read it, and it might inspire her, and I'm sure she can contact or go ahead and connect with her on Musicuentos or on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
Sure, my Twitter is Cottrell.
Great. Great.
And on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Musicuentos.
Musicuentos. There we are. Good. So one more time, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to see you in Minneapolis.
All right, I'll see you then. Thanks for having me, Paulina. It was a good conversation.
Adios.
Ciao.